Happy Monday, everyone. Welcome to the TDR Traded Black podcast. I am your host, Shad Dales. Happy MLK Day for all of our American viewers out there. And today we wanted to come on at 12 o'clock. Busy week, to say the least. Big news last week regarding the HHS and their public newsletter about the recommendation of rescheduling towards the DEA of cannabis. And we really want to dive into some of that stuff as well as what's the current state of safe banking. So why we're having this podcast here today. No other better person to talk about some of these topics than the biggest cannabis lobbyist in Washington right now. Let's bring in back to the podcast, Don Murphy. And good to see him, as Mr. Murphy has been a huge advocate for this industry. Don, good to see you. Actually, did he log off there for a second? Mitch is coming back.
Yeah,
on.
It looks like Washington called right quick. He'll be right back with us. You know how it is. Things are moving out there. He'll be right back with us. Just give us 2 seconds. We'll have him on. Shad, what do you talk about what you've been seeing in the industry, at least throughout the weekend?
Well, needless to say, I cannot believe some of the stuff that was outlined in that letter, including the government lying that 30 plus years of medical benefits towards cannabis. That was huge, to say the least. And in a lot of ways, comparing cannabis to alcohol, which I think anybody following this industry, that's just common knowledge. But I think the most important thing in the conversations that we want to have, obviously, here with Don here today is what's this say about the space? And is there more and more people in Congress in Washington that are actually starting to listen to? All right, so he's popped up. Let's bring him onto the podcast right now and dive into today's live stream. Mr. Murphy, good to see you. How are things?
Good to be seen. Sorry, gentlemen, technology is not my strong suit by any stretch. So it actually is why I like to talk to members, directly rather than Zoom or something, because things don't go wrong when you're there in person.
Well, you're here, and that's all that matters. And it looks like you figured it out. So you learn something new every single day, right?
Terrific. Yep.
Well, happy Monday, happy MLK Day for all the Americans out there. I think we'll dive right into it. We're here in 2024 now, and this appears to be a big year for the industry. It's a moment of truth time where we can see change, or will we see change, or the status quo? But either way, we're going to have some big announcements that are going to be coming down in this calendar year. So let's begin with what you continue to advocate for, which is safe banking. And in a tweet last week, you outlined that based on recent conversations with safe banking members, you believe that 2024 is going to be a very happy year, largely because of the progress that was made last year in 2023. So as we begin with that, can you elaborate into detail on what that means? And more importantly, like why you're feeling so confident towards this potentially passing?
Well, for a couple of reasons. One, and I know folks who are watching and people who are occasional watchers of Congress think things should move faster, and they should, but they don't. So the speed at which this is moving now is more than we could have hoped for, more than I would have expected, right?
Really?
Safe banking has moved at relatively lightning speed compared to everything else, in virtually everything else in Congress. And the Schedule 3 announcement, I won't say is imminent, but I certainly believe will happen sooner rather than later. I think it is somewhat of an election year win for President Biden. He will tout it as a win. Democrats will tout it as a win, and they should. But it is a big miss compared to what he had proposed. So I will say this. It may be a bigger loss if it fails than it is a win if it passes, if that makes sense. Yeah. It would be stunning to me and a lot of others. Like, I have talked to a lot of senators on both sides of the aisle, and I ask basically two questions. Is it possible that they could not come back, the DEA could not come back and accept the HHS's recommendation? Like, remember, HHS is basically the health department and DEA is law enforcement, right? So who should have a greater say in this? In my opinion, whether marijuana is medicine, that is almost exclusively the lane of the health department. And what I said in that tweet the other day was, let's be honest, medical marijuana is so 1990s. I mean, that's when this all started. And it's a shame that it's taken this long for the federal government to come around when virtually every state in some form or fashion has said, yes, marijuana has medicinal value. And quite honestly, patients should not be treated as criminals. The other thing is there's not a lot of pushback. We'll call it a trial balloon. When HHS initially came out with their redacted letter, there was very little pushback from people in Congress, except for a small handful. And when I say a small handful, I'm talking about a dozen, maybe a slightly more than a dozen members of Congress sent a letter to DEA that said, don't do this. But none of them were doctors. None of them were doctors. So I think the medical community on Capitol Hill, the elected officials, see this as something that should happen. Whether they really like it or not, whether their constituents like it or not, they're not going to have much to say about it one way or the other. They're not going to pipe up. And that bodes well for DEA coming out and doing something that could be seen as political, right?
Right.
Like if you're going to do something political, you have to look at what the downside is. Joe Biden's not going to lose any votes because they rescheduled marijuana to be medicine. Just not going to happen. So it's a smart play for them, in my opinion.
So you mentioned that this is moving at lightning speed right now. Do you think it's because it is an election year, but there's more, I guess, concern for this being a loss than a gain? So that do you think that's why it's moving quicker than what we've seen in the past?
I think the president and Democrats need to deliver something.
Yeah.
Right? To their hardcore progressive base, medical is not it, right? Safe banking is not it. But to the large, but he doesn't have to win a primary, right? He doesn't have to say, oh, I supported medical or I moved it to be medicine.
Yeah.
And debate Dean Phillips, for example, right? Okay, yes, he does have a primary, but barely. And so the downside for the president isn't his progressive base, right? They're either going to vote for him or they're not going to vote at all. That would be it. But I don't think that's going to be because of marijuana, right?
Yeah.
That hardcore progressive side of his party is going to be upset about the Gaza Strip and Israel and all that more so than they are marijuana policy, I believe.
Yeah. John Verville, good to see you. Happy Monday. He writes, any worries, any government shutdown worries?
No.
No?
Look, it could happen, but I don't think it will happen. Like it will affect this. It may delay this. Like they may be looking at, and I do believe I won't call them conspiracies, but I do believe all of this is coordinated, right, by the president, by his administration. If the DEA wanted to sign off on HHS's letter and move it to a Schedule 3, they would communicate with the White House and say, when do you want us to do this?
Right.
And when you're in the middle of a government shutdown, that's probably not the time to do it because the handful of Republicans, even leadership like McConnell, will take the floor and say, look, while the Democrats are failing to negotiate on keeping the government open or on funding the war in the Middle East, they're legalizing pot.
Yeah.
That press release or that speech writes itself. So you really don't want to have this come out at that time. They'll have to find a fairly narrow window. It'll probably happen on a Friday afternoon after when you put bad news, because the hardcore advocates will all know.
Yeah.
You'll be doing I'll be doing live tweets and you'll be doing podcasts at that moment, right? When that happens, whether it's a Friday or a Saturday or Sunday, won't matter. But they'll probably bury it in the news cycle somewhere. Of
course they will, right?
Some place where the average person won't have to know or care that much.
Yeah, it's like they want to be part of this, but they don't want to be part of this. But when it comes to rescheduling, and I know that you're a big advocate for safe banking, you believe rescheduling is indeed going to happen, correct?
I do.
And it's Schedule 3, correct?
I can't see it being a 2. Like a 2 would be a big. That would be a huge loss, I think.
Huge
right?
loss.
Right. So no, it's either 3 or it's nothing.
Yeah. So do you have any idea? Do you think timeline wise when that'll be announced, or it's just nobody knows?
No, nobody knows.
Yeah.
It will be so sudden. Like 6 people will know, and that's it. Like I'm not like. I'll say I've got a few chits to play. I'm not going to use a chit to find out in advance.
Yeah, of course.
Like it doesn't do me. There's no upside. It's
Okay, so if we get rescheduling, you think that only builds the case more for safe banking, correct? Or is it 2 completely separate things?
I think they're 2 separate things.
Okay.
Like if you're a Republican, you probably don't care much what the Biden HHS DEA says about it, right? most Republicans would rather this thing just go away. They want their bankers to be happy. They don't have to vote for it if possible. They'll probably go back to their bankers and say, look, I would have voted for it if you needed my vote, but you didn't. And I got some people screaming back home. So I get to have it both ways and everybody's happy. I did have a member of the Senate say to me, she said, how you doing? Well, the member said, how you doing? And I said, well, I'd be doing better if I had your vote, you know? And she said, well, you won. And I'm like, yeah, I won. Yeah. You know, so like, you know.
So do you think with it being an election year, this is a priority? Like it is an opportunity to, you know, you've said like, look, is Biden going to lose any voters if he doesn't reschedule? Probably not. But in any way possible, it's just pure speculation amongst people within this space. Is it a priority to get something passed before this election coming up next fall?
I think it's a priority for Congress in general to show that they're doing something about anything.
Yeah.
Not necessarily drug policy, but they've got to be able to say, we did some things, right? If all they can say is, well, we passed, 12 bills, well, if they can say 13, it sounds better than 12. They won't have to go into the details about what they are.
Yeah.
But, let's be honest, the Biden administration isn't exactly working to pass safe banking.
Yeah.
It's an issue that only, for the most part, those of us on this podcast care about. It's very few people care about it. And it's just not a huge win for advocates or opponents on either side. Quite honestly, does Sam care that much if safe banking passes? They shouldn't.
Yeah.
Right? Like my problem with Sam is they're always about no. They're never they never come to the table and say yes with amendments. Right? They're always, no, this is terrible.
Yeah.
And that's the way, that's different than what most folks are doing. Most folks would say, okay, I can be for this, but we got to fix Project Choke Point, or we need to let cancer patients have their firearm access, or we need to fund expungement, right? It's not right that banks are putting billions of dollars in their portfolios and in their banks, and people are still in jail for this, or still have records for this.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I see that. Do you have any conversations ever with Chuck Schumer? Like, what's his stance on this? Because you can't really suck and blow at the same time. And I know a lot of people in this space are frustrated with what he says because there's a lot of promise, but never really delivered.
Yeah, I have had a few conversations, brief conversations. And as much as it pains me to say this, I think he wants this maybe more than, most people in the Senate. Like we would not be where we are. And I know people don't think we're anywhere, right? But we really are, right? There have only been 3 bills that have passed out of the Senate Banking Committee in the last 4 or 5 years. And safe banking is one of them.
Right.
So that says a lot to me, right? Whether it's, been on the floor or not, that's sort of immaterial.
Yeah.
But I can blame, and we can all blame Chuck Schumer for not doing enough, right? If all we do is get to first base and we don't score any runs, and he's in the back, like he's the guy calling the plays, or I'm mixing my metaphors here, it's all on him. He holds the gavel.
Yep, he does.
Floor time, if we need floor time, it's up to him to make it happen. But that's one of the reasons I think we'll wake up one day and find it in some must pass or omnibus bill, and we'll just wake up on Monday morning like, oh, look what's in here.
Yeah, exactly.
And it will have the same effect as law, right? There won't be a separate safe banking bill signing, but it's a win.
Yeah. I think some of my viewers like that term I just used, but I won't say it again. But speaking of politics, you are now on your way to New Hampshire, getting on a flight this afternoon. So I appreciate you checking in here. You're going to New Hampshire all in an effort to generate more awareness to political leaders about the industry. Saying that, I guess, what do you have planned on who you want to meet with potentially and speak with? Like, what's the trip to New Hampshire? You're there for 8 days. So what's going to be accomplished?
Yeah, I fully expect to speak to all of the real candidates who will be there. Nikki,
okay.
Ron DeSantis. I'd love to speak to former President Trump. I have tickets to his rally on Wednesday.
Interesting.
Ramaswamy, going to give him a chance to explain his vote in Ohio.
Yeah.
That's something that, he did to me, but he didn't really do it to the public at large. I want to see Dean Phillips, and I want to see Mr. Kennedy.
Yep.
And give them a chance to speak publicly on the record about all this, and actually be in the room when they make their stump speeches, when they say what they got to say. I will tell you that most of these Republican candidates, and certainly the Democrats, have been fairly good in speaking in favor of federalism, states' rights when it comes specifically to marijuana use.
Yep. Dean Phillips has outlined that. I think Ramaswamy is very much on that. RFK Jr. needless to say. Interesting to see somebody like Trump or Nikki Haley and what their views on all this are. I think Donald Trump doesn't want any part of this, but he's not against it either.
Well, but here's the thing. He knows, and I remember this from 2016, he knows people who have used marijuana for medical purposes and says, on the record, on TV, and for whatever reason, they get results from it. He spent 4 years, he missed an opportunity to do this himself, but he didn't ratchet up the drug war in spite of what people think. Yes, Jeff Sessions was his attorney general, and yes, Jeff Sessions repealed the Cole memo. But I'll point out, Joe Biden, attorney general, did not reinstate the Cole memo. Very little bad happened because of that. And Jeff Sessions repealed the Cole memo because it was an Obama era directive, not because it had anything to do with pot. Like, he repealed most, if not all of those directives, right?
Interesting.
It was policy. It was, sort of general policy in politics.
Yeah.
It didn't have anything to do with pot. It just got caught up in the shuffle.
One of our viewers is actually right. Curious if Don is a paid lobbyist for the industry or an independent lobbyist. Appreciated views either ways. He brings a lot. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. To be straight up, I am not a paid lobbyist for the industry. My funding comes from philanthropy. The person that funds my work has no involvement in this at all, doesn't benefit from safe banking becoming a law or not, Schedule 3 or not, just appreciates my ability to sort of get in front of people and say what needs to be said. But no, I don't get anything from the industry.
Well, I think it's safe to say, Don, if we could times you by 10, we would have federal legalization, would we not?
Well, it's funny that you say that because someone actually said if we had 10 Don Murphys, pot would be legal now.
I did hear that, actually. Was that on Twitter?
That was NCIA's chief lobbyist said that.
Nice.
But, to that point, we do need more people with experience in this industry and with the drug and with illness. The other day, Jelly Roll, who I'd never heard of, I got to be honest, showed up, and he was in the Senate Banking Committee talking about fentanyl and heroin and all of his past addictions. And he spoke in a way that most people don't, who have those sorts of experiences, don't get to speak to members of Congress. And
why was he able to?
Well, because he was invited by Chairman Brown and Ranking Member Tim Scott, as I understand. Like, they're trying to shake that fentanyl bill, the Fentanyl Act, out of the House. And this was an opportunity to shed a little light on that and get the media to come in and talk about it and shake it loose.
Did it hit home, do you find? Like, was there a lot of people listening?
There were a lot of people. There were the kind of people who don't typically listen, right? It's kind of like Taylor Swift showing up at a football game, right? Like, people tune in because she's going to be on, perhaps as and that's what happened here. There were just tons of hits on Twitter and trending on Twitter because he was there speaking truth to power. Yeah.
So Jelly Roll, his name Jason D. Ford. So he basically said a testimony for all our viewers out there to the U.S. senators to pass the Fend Off Fentanyl Act. With this bill, it basically helps stop the supply of fentanyl. And I can understand why people are listening. When I look at this, I cannot believe right now, based on Jelly Roll's testimony, cannabis is a Schedule I drug and fentanyl is a Schedule II drug, which to me is mind-blowing here in 2024, don't you think?
Well, yeah. In fact, that goes to your point earlier. Do I think that the DEA would schedule cannabis as a Schedule II? No, they can't, because fentanyl is a Schedule II and fentanyl's killing millions, like thousands and thousands of people. And clearly marijuana has killed no one.
Yeah. So great picture. Thanks for bringing that up, Mitch. Another thing to point out.
By the way, people like Jelly Roll who look like Jelly Roll don't typically walk the halls of Congress, right?
No.
So that, not to be too, blunt about it, but that's just the truth. But he was speaking for thousands and thousands of people who, quite honestly, don't even know who their senator is, and their senator doesn't know who they are.
Hmm.
So when I had a little chat with them, I said, "Bring your friends.
Yeah, of
Right?
course.
You were amazing. Just bring your friends because these folks need to hear from people like you."
I think that's the big thing too. When I was in Miami last year and I met Dean Phillips at an event, and I think the big message that he was saying to everybody within the industry is we need more conversation and more of you to come to Washington. And I was surprised to hear that not a lot of people really attended. It was just third-party lobbyists, yes, such as yourself. But at the same time, too, there comes a point that if you're advocating for this industry, you need to show up and start getting the message out there more and more. Is that happening more this year? And like some of the progress we made last year?
Yeah, not visibly that I can see.
No.
I mean, honestly, I was the only cannabis lobbyist, in this Jelly Roll here. There was no one showing up. And look, I know what Jelly Roll was there for is not cannabis, but to me, it's germane, right? It's all part of the same debate that we're having about the drug war.
Yeah.
Whether it's fentanyl, heroin, cannabis, anything else. And look, the 200 pages from the HHS letter just sort of are Exhibit A that we've been lied to all these years.
Yeah.
And Congress almost has to act. Like, how can they not act in the face of all that damning indictment on federal letterhead?
Can you imagine if we got an announcement on 420 of rescheduling?
Yeah, I got to be honest. Well, first of all, I think that's a Saturday. And
Is it a Saturday? Okay.
Yeah. And someone
You would
pointed
know
out
that.
to me, it's actually 4/20/2024 is the same backwards as forwards. There's a word for that. So of all years, this would be the one. But I'll be honest, I'm not a big fan of the 420 issue, 420, because it was, as I understand it, made it was made into what it is by kids getting high behind the bleachers in high school, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so you can't advocate for legalization on the premise that it will help reduce underage use if you are celebrating and putting those pieces of legislation in on 420, right?
Yeah.
Like the serious issue of drug policy should not get caught up in the ha-ha of 420.
Yeah. Question you may or may not answer. Like, obviously, big awareness with Jelly Roller last week. But are you surprised at all? Like some big advocates, like the names of Joe Rogan, Snoop Dogg, Willie Nelson, Elon Musk. I don't know about Elon Musk, but definitely Joe Rogan, Willie Nelson, and Snoop Dogg. I'm surprised that they have never ever really gone to Washington and speak on this behalf. Meaning, they're the biggest names within the space, but could you see eventually some big name people like that if this continues to build more and more momentum making their way to Washington?
Well, I tell you what, if those who you mentioned who are on the right side of the spectrum
Yeah.
help more than the left, like we've got the left, we need, we'll say the Joe Rogans, who I think is fairly even-handed, right? I think he
Yeah.
gets a lot of play among Republicans. Elon Musk certainly does.
Of course.
What I don't understand about him is he's a huge government contractor and can smoke cannabis right on Twitter or X in public. Yet, if you're an employee of the federal government, you can't do that. Like, you can't use it at all. You can't have a history with it. You can't get a job in the federal government if you've ever used cannabis. Yet, Elon Musk can have billions of dollars of government contracts. It's sort of it's inconsistent at best. So I appreciate his being forthright about it, for sure.
You almost wonder if he's even aware of that. Another thing I want to touch on, you've also filed to be a delegate at the RNC convention in Milwaukee, which I'm sure it will be interest to many within this industry. How important is this for you to win that election and be on the convention floor? This is very important. But if you were to win that election, what would be involved, I guess, on the convention floor?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you, this will be my fifth. I've been to every convention since 2000, and
Okay.
no one in my state has been to more in that period of time than I have. And the fact that I'm the sort of the weed whisperer, if you will, right, that I could win a race to be a convention delegate. The people that will vote for me are the hardcore Republican primary voters in my congressional district or in the state at the state convention. And I've been fairly successful either because of or in spite of my advocacy, right? 200 or 300 of the most conservative Republicans in Maryland have consistently voted to send me to the convention. And when members of Congress see me on the convention floor as a conservative at that level, they say to themselves, or they can't avoid the fact that cannabis, support for cannabis in any form, as I am an advocate, is not a deal killer for Republicans, right? It is not the third rail that you think. Like, how could Don Murphy be at the Republican convention if he supports cannabis?
Right.
Well, here I am, Senator, and I was there in 16, was there in 20, was there in 08. I was actually the chairman
Yeah.
in 08 at the same time I was lobbying for this issue. So I think it sends a message. And quite honestly, the fact that any of these candidates would want me as their convention delegate says that they have no problem with cannabis advocacy or legalization or any of the things I support. So
Yeah.
it really is it's a symbolic win, if nothing else.
Yeah, you've said this a number of times, even on some of the Twitter space that we had back in the summer. This bill, or I should say, bill, safe banking, it continues to get bipartisan support through this industry, correct?
Correct. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. One other thing you also mentioned too, you've had many discussions with Montana congressional delegation leaders, which you stated, quote, no state has delivered more support towards safe banking than the state of Montana. It includes the likes of Senator Steve Daines, who's been at the center of all this. When you have these discussions with the people from Montana, what's involved in those discussions that backs up what you're saying about the support that they provide?
Well, it's not what they're saying, it's what they actually did. These
Okay.
guys voted for safe banking. And the fact that John Tester, the Democrat senator, and Senator Steve Daines, both from Montana, sit on the banking committee. That's the point. Those two senators from Montana voted for safe banking. There's no other state. And then Ryan Zinke also voted for safe banking. Rosendale did not vote, so he wasn't there. So he's like a zero, but still, they're 3 for 3 on yes votes.
Yeah.
Right. No other state can say that, and there's no other state that's got the kind of support in the Senate that they do. Now, just to be clear, there are other states that have co-sponsors, right? Like Oregon or California, any of these, many of these states, certainly the blue states, have both senators as co-sponsors, but they're not members of the committee where they actually got to vote.
Yeah.
So that's why I make that statement.
Yeah. Well, listen, I know you got a flight to catch. We'll cut this up short, but one last thing I wanted to bring up as far as rescheduling in the HHS letter last week. I know you haven't got a chance to read it, but I'm sure the 8 days in New Hampshire, you'll dive into it. But some of the notable things that really outlined to me was the government, they say, has been lying for 30 years based on the medical benefits of cannabis. Like, these were pretty eye-opening information that became public knowledge to a lot of people. But based off of that, like, what's your take to hear something like that? Are you surprised that was included or not surprised at all?
If that's the language that they used, that is a huge win for us, right? One branch of the government saying another branch has been lying about cannabis. You can't walk that back.
Yeah.
You just can't walk. And this isn't this isn't the some other agency that doesn't have purview over the health aspect of this, right? That's what they're talking about. Cannabis and health. And quite honestly, Sam is going to have a real hard time with this one.
You think?
Yeah.
Another thing they compared it was HHS compared cannabis to alcohol in terms of use for individuals, which really would help the cause for descheduling. But I know a lot of people that are not on board with this. Like, can you imagine if cannabis was legalized back in the 1930s and they were bringing alcohol to the forefront here in 2024 and the backlash that we would receive based off of that? But it's, I don't know. We could sit here and we've had this conversation many times, but it's ridiculous to think that we're here where we're here. But at the end of the day, it's just like people like yourself are pushing this narrative forward. And I'm sure many people within this industry appreciate everything that you're doing so far.
Well, I appreciate that. Look, there's so much inconsistency when it comes to drug policy. And it's on both sides, right? Like, for example, Republicans are talking about wanting people to have the right to vote and firearms and all that stuff, yet they don't support safe banking in the Graham Amendment, which would allow that. Like, that's what I'm telling Republicans, that they need to support safe banking because it helps support their bona fides on the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
Democrats for years who did away with smoking in bars now want cannabis cafes. So, this stuff comes around to bite you when you want to do what's popular for your base, but maybe what doesn't make any sense in the long-term future. So it's interesting to see how that's all going to play out.
Yeah, one of our viewers says, shout out to Kevin Sabat today. Someone give him a hug. I don't know if you know who that is, but no, he doesn't like cannabis all that much. But
no, Kevin is he's the head of SAM.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And anytime you try to contest him on some of his thoughts, you're blocked on Twitter, which I don't think accomplishes anything. It's like, if we're going to have a discussion, let's have it. But moment of truth time. Next fall, when the election rolls around, is cannabis rescheduled to a Schedule 3, and is safe banking passed in that timeline?
I would say that safe banking, well, let's go with Schedule 3 first. I think Schedule 3 will be in the bag before September.
Okay.
And safe banking may have to wait till after the election in the lame duck.
Okay.
That's the worst case scenario, right? But remember, these guys go out of their last day is September 27th.
Okay.
So there's no floor time in October or the beginning of November. And when they do come back mid-November, that's the lame duck. So they're really, and by the way, they're out all of August. So there's 3 weeks in September, and then there's appropriations season most of June and July. There really isn't a lot of time. There'll be a lot of free time after this, right? Now, the question is, what happens after the election? Does Biden win? Do the Democrats hold the Senate? Do they get back the House? Will they want more than just safe banking? They may just say, hey, we're not going to push through a safe banking bill where Republicans can put their fingerprints all over it. We'll wait until after the new Congress starts. That would be the Democrats' decision to make. The only problem is what Republican support you have in the Senate right now will disappear if Choke Point and Graham aren't included in whatever they do.
Interesting. Okay.
That's a gamble that Democrats will have to make if and when they win everything.
Okay. Good to know. All right. You're on a flight to New Hampshire. Keep us updated on your trip out there. And we're curious to see some of the discussions that you have, but best of luck. And most importantly, on behalf of myself and everybody that's been following this space, again, a big thank you for everything that you're doing.
Terrific. Well, thank you very much. And listen, if anybody listening in or watching are going to be in New Hampshire, hit me up, DM. I'd love to meet you. And look, there are some things we can do in the room. Like if we ask the question and we ask the question enough, it will become part of the narrative, and it will become part of the record, and the media will start to cover it. And that'll be a help for sure.
When it comes to some of these access to these rooms, like if we came to you to some of these places, like when you're in these rooms, is there chances to film and stuff like that, or they don't allow that sort of thing?
Absolutely. No, everybody's filming. The phones are up all the time. So, if you live within 100 miles of New Hampshire and you're an advocate for this, I don't know how you don't go. Like, you got to go. You got to show up.
This is great. All right, Don, listen, best of luck, and let's keep in touch, okay?
Will do. Thanks.
All right. That was great. Thanks, Mitch, for obviously bringing him up. But big week coming up for the next 8 days. And coming up, especially as a big week, thanks for watching, everybody, today on the live stream. On Wednesday, we're having the biggest analyst within the space, Pablo Zuanich from Zuanich & Associates. He's going to join us to talk about what he likes, both short-term and long-term, the companies he likes in this specific space. And then on Friday, we're going to have Dan, the Chartman guys, to talk about the technical side of these stocks within the space and what stocks that he thinks could move both in the short and long-term, all coming up. As well, we've launched our daily newsletter here at TDR. So go to thedalesreport.com and subscribe. We've got all the latest. We've got our own indexes. We've got bonus coverage of interviews that we're doing. And as well, we're going to be giving away swag. So basically, subscribe to our newsletter, our daily newsletter, by going on to thedalesreport.com. We give you all kinds of bonus information, our own indexes, and what companies we're watching and why, both in the macro and small cap space. In the meantime, enjoy the rest of your MLK day, and we'll check back in with you back on Wednesday. Thanks, everyone. Hey everyone, thanks for watching. And if you want to learn more about the emerging industries that we cover, then leave a comment below and let us know who you want us to interview, the questions you want asked, and the information that you want to learn. We want to hear from you. As usual, click on that bell for all notifications to get the latest information. Share this video with your network, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.